This is the College Connection Podcast.
Welcome to the College Connection Podcast. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. My name is Kelly Kean, and I'm a nursing consultant at the Newfoundland and Labrador College of Nurses.
And my name is Wanda Squires. I'm a nursing consultant also here at the Newfoundland and Labrador College of Nurses.
With us today, we have our special guest, Brenda Carroll, who is the Director of Professional Conduct Review. And today we're going to be having a conversation with Brenda about some of the complaints that she has been seeing recently in her role here at the college as the Director of Professional Conduct Review. So welcome, Brenda.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
So Brenda, I guess one of the roles of the regulator is to intervene when practice is unacceptable. And unfortunately, that is, something that we do see here at the college. We want every nurse to be working, to their professional standards. So the code of professional conduct for RNs and NPs, the standards of practice for licensed practical nurses, as well as the standards of practice for registered psychiatric nurses. But sometimes those standards may be breached. And your department works through those complaints. So there's processes in place where your department works through all of those, those complaints. We're wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about some of the trends or some of the more common complaints that you are seeing, within, the last year at the college.
For sure. I mean, the trends do remain kind of similar year to year, but every once in a while we see some changes. In this last year, I think one of the things we've noticed is definitely a rise in incivility in the workplace. That's sort of been a matter that's been creeping up in frequency in the workplace, but it's certainly rising to one of the most common bases for complaint. We've always seen a trend of documentation issues resulting in complaints to the college. Documentation is something we continually deal with, so it'll be interesting to see with documentation whether Core Care will help alleviate some of those issues that we're seeing with practice with nurses in the workplace. I mean, we may see a rise as people learn to use that system, but maybe in the long run we'll see a decrease.
Yes.
So documentation for sure. Medical management is, and med administration and following those principles often is one of our sort of frequent sources of complaint. But I think where we're seeing a rise of late is more of those issues being actually related to underlying substance use disorder and drug diversion, more than sort of error, oversight, or other. And oddly enough, unauthorized practice kind of made a little bit of a spike last year. So people working without a license or working without liability insurance, we've seen that kind of is hit and miss. Sometimes in some years we won't see very much of that, and other times we see a fair amount of it. Last year we did see a number of files. Not so much people missing the renewal period, which we occasionally have that happen. But actually it's most often people who have gone off on some kind of an extended leave. Yeah, so we used to have, the legacy RN college used to have a non-practicing license status. And when people went off on an extended leave, they often would switch the license status to that non-practicing status and then forget when they came back.
Right.
And for unauthorized practice, you can't even do orientation from home because we know that there's some modules and things like that the employer can have the registrant complete at home. But, a good reminder that you need a license to even complete any orientation at home.
Yeah. And the rule, I was just going to say, the rule of thumb that I've often told registrants is if it's something in your role with your employment and you're getting paid to do that, it is definitely going to be considered nursing practice.
Yeah.
There are some other things, like for instance, if you're taking a course over a weekend to learn how to do like cosmetic injectables, you should also have a license for that. So that's not necessarily something you're doing in the course of your employment or getting paid for. But definitely, if it's something your employer is paying you for, whether it's an online WMIS module or a back care module, those things are considered nursing practice.
That's right. Yeah. I was just going to carry on with that conversation about the non-practicing. So currently we the new regulatory college and all college nurses, we don't have that non-practicing. So I can see where maybe the confusion may have been around, that licensing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's really important for nurses to recognize, the information that relates to their practice, right? So reading their emails, checking at the college website for information related to holding that license to practice, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And keeping that information up to date, right? Yeah. So ensuring that if you move or you change your email address, or a lot of people tend to use their work email address as a registration email address. But then if you're off on an extended leave from your employer, you don't necessarily have access to that email address. So making sure those things are up to date.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And Brenda, going back to incivility, I guess we'll just have a chat about some of those trends that you've mentioned. So the incivility in the workplace, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I guess because incivility can be many different forms. What are you seeing as like an underlying theme within that incivility? Like, is it, incivility with each other, the clients? Does it come down to communication or,
Yeah, a lot of it is communication. Certainly incivility can include conduct as well, but most of the time it's communication.
Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing, I would say, a balanced mix between incivility that's happening between colleagues,
Right.
Whether that's, people of the same health profession designation or different, so alternate members of the collaborative team that you're working with. But we are seeing more complaints coming directly from the public related to particular communication style with patients and families.
Okay.
So, and part of that maybe is, we have our online complaint form submission portal, which is a little bit more accessible to individuals than our old process. So that might give rise to, it's quick, it's easy. People sometimes will just, they're frustrated, they get on and they're just like, I'm going to lodge a complaint. And that's fine. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to receive those complaints and process them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, whether the rise in the number being reported is as a result of the rise in the number occurring.
Yeah.
Or versus just the rise in the number actually taking the time to report them. I think there's a little bit of both in that equation. But certainly I think it's the general, it's not necessarily the intention of the registrant when they're communicating with patients and family members. Sometimes it is difficult. Patients and families can be in very difficult situations. They can be very stressed. They can be very frustrated. They can have a lot of other things impacting them. And so, our patients and families may not be on their A game in the way they choose to communicate. But as a professional, we have to rise above that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate there are stressors in the workplace. And, so it is kind of a perfect storm sometimes. And although even the intention might be correct in what someone is saying, for instance, if there was a family who had a difficult interchange with another nurse and you went in to kind of say, hey, can I help? And, the other nurse was very upset and like, can I try and smooth things over? The way you go about doing that can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's rising above that to make sure your communication is always professional.
Yeah.
And then we have the other flip side of the spectrum, where some people get almost too casual with patients and families and sort of cross over those boundaries of saying, things that might be more politically or socially inappropriate or oversharing or saying, things that
language and things like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And that just general erosion of the professionalism side of the communication.
Yeah. So with communication, I mean, I think it's very important to reflect upon the different styles of communication. So your body language, your tone, right? Like, kind of think about what it is you want to say. Like I would say, don't dive into things, right? So to try to prevent that poor practice. So just thinking about communication, like the way they speak, the way that they're using that body language, it would be very important to kind of think about it before you actually go in and do it, kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, we know from our therapeutic communication course that we did in nursing school, how, yes, I mean, part of it is what you say, but, the majority of it, of how communication is received by somebody else really comes into that nonverbal. Like
what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. So the tone is very important, your body language and those sorts of things. Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah.
And what about communication outside of the workplace? Like, let's say on a group chat, like, it could be like a social media group chat. We know there's a lot of those in the workplace. Perhaps they're talking about, switching shifts and those sorts of things. Do we ever get complaints related to those sorts of incivility in the private chats?
Well, there's a couple pitfalls with those groups that people should be aware of. And one is making sure that if there is a group chat amongst your work colleagues, that whatever the conversation isn't patient information related, first of all. Yeah. So we have had instances where, people have used those group chats as a forum to express frustration. Oh, I had a horrible day today, patient, whomever, and then maybe something frustrating that happened with a patient in the chat. And even if you don't identify that patient by name, having any of that information contained in a group chat like that is really inappropriate. So that would be one of the pitfalls with those group chats. But yes, sometimes we also then get into the more toxic behavior kind of stuff amongst, a group of individuals that can get very challenging. So, and sometimes there will be subgroups that get made so that some of the staff is in one group and some of the staff are left out. And then there's and I mean, really, it comes down to basic, almost just being a nice human, right? I mean, if I wouldn't say it to your face, I shouldn't be talking about you behind your back, and I shouldn't be putting it into a group chat, whether you're part of the group chat or not. And I always chuckle when people sort of say things like, well, no offense, but, and I was like, well, you know what? If you have to preface it with no offense, it's probably got an element that could be considered offensive within it. Yeah. And maybe you should stop and think before you say it. Yeah. And so same kind of thing, just because it's in a group chat and it's between you and I, doesn't mean that it's appropriate for me to say something nasty, about Wanda. And I think that's just good human behavior. Yeah. And sometimes though people take a bit of solace in, the collective suffering and find some, support in sort of venting within those kinds of groups. And that's really dangerous because we have had many communication issues arise out of those kind of forums.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that might not be happening in the workplace. You could be at home doing those things, but keeping in mind that as a professional, you hold that license 24/7 and that you can't have a private life, because of course everyone does, but keeping in mind that, you always have to exhibit those professional behaviors that's expected in the Code of Professional Conduct for RNs and NPs, as well as the standards of practice for licensed practical nurses.
That's right, yeah. And Brenda, you mentioned, the complaints that come into the college. And so when a complaint comes in, is it specific to one particular thing, or are you finding that there's complaints that come in where it's several types of concerns that are, with a nurse's practice?
Oftentimes they're complex complaints is what we would refer to them as, where maybe there's some competency issues, and part of that is documentation, and part of that is communication, and right. So there's a bigger picture where you're breaking it down into sort of smaller elements. But we do occasionally have complaints that, come in and say, on this date, on this instance, person X said, one sentence that I found offensive, and that's the basis of a complaint. So, but I would say the majority have multiple concerns raised in them, right? And the way we address those is we kind of tease those out, we spell them out, we look at our standards of practice and the code of ethics and code of professional conduct for the relevant designation, and we match the conduct that is alleged to have been inappropriate to the standards or elements in the codes. And then that's what would go to the registrant saying, we've had a concern raised that you engaged in the following conduct. And here's where it links to your foundational document where you may have been in transgression of that document. And now we'd like you to kind of give us your side of the story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And is there anything that you're seeing that's particularly concerning, but not necessarily, you see it on a regular basis? I know we're talking about like the trends, but still things that you're seeing and you're like, wow, that is a bit concerning, but it's not a trend quite yet. Hopefully it doesn't get there either.
Yeah, hopefully the things that aren't going to be on this list next year, but are kind of bubbling below the surface a little bit.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of the things that I've been surprised of late is more around that duty to provide care. Like we've seen more and more complaints, and sometimes it's come in as the exclusive complaint, and sometimes been part of a bigger picture, right? But this sort of sense that taking breaks along beyond the allotted time, like so taking a 3.5 hour break in one go on a night shift to go and sleep, or in some instances, leave the facility. That's really concerning. We are seeing to the point where we've actually had registrants put in responses to allegations saying, well, this happened, that happened. And then I left for 3 hours because I went to go take my break. And it was like, and there's a sense that that's okay because it seems to be something that happens and everybody does it, that it's actually acceptable and okay. And I think, that's something that's concerning to me. I mean, even leaving a facility on your, paid dinner break, depending on your work environment, is something we should be very careful about. Because if you're in a very small facility, your facility policy may be that you go into the break room and take your break, but you have to be accessible to come back to the floor in the event of an emergency. And never is it acceptable to take breaks beyond the allotted time on your...
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so that part of it, and then sort of related to that is, sort of those quiet times on night shift, what people are doing with those more quieter times in their shift. We all know that people, bring a book to work and have sat and read or something. There's some things that employers may find acceptable to do when you've finished all your duties and responsibilities and you're sort of monitoring patients and doing your rounds, but you've got a little bit of downtime in between. But there are certainly some things that are clearly unacceptable to be doing in the workplace during your paid work time. And we've seen that doesn't seem to be very clear. There seems to be a lot of, again, part of a bigger picture, people engaging in activities that have no place to be sort of conducted in the workplace.
I can see that as being perception as well. Like you said, the nurse may have all of their activities, their duties completed. And if they decide to, do something that they probably shouldn't be doing in the workplace, or, and a family member or a client sees that, it's like, well, how does that look to the client or the family member, And so I can, with regards to the perception piece, like, well, you're doing this, but technically you could have been doing that, So I think it's important to, to recognize, that level of professionalism, when they're practicing.
And going back to something that you said, Brenda, about, well, this is what everybody does here, or, this is what we do here. Wanda and I hear that a lot when we do presentations as well, with registrants in, in various practice settings. And, one of the things that we stress in our presentations is that my practice is my responsibility, right? So at the end of the day, should something happen and you're practice is called into question, you're the one that's held accountable for that. Not your unit, not all of your colleagues, but it will fall to you. So very important for, for everybody to keep that in mind, that, your practice is nobody else's responsibility. It is your own. And, we never want to do anything that would jeopardize our, or jeopardize our license, but also, jeopardize our credibility and our reputation, because that's very important as well.
Yeah.
For sure. So, and Brenda, you mentioned documentation too. Is there anything specific within, documentation that you're seeing? Like, is it a lack of documentation? Is it not clear documentation? Because the expectation is for registrants to document accurately, clearly, and timely, right? So as close to the time of care as possible. So, like, what kind of issues are you seeing with respect to that?
I think when you look at it from the terms you just mentioned, so when it comes to accurate charting, one of the things we see a lot of is where people have had like a checklist somewhere in the, yes, ADLs are all done. Yeah, ate breakfast, brushed teeth, check, 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 check. And then the narrative will say, remains NPO for procedure. And it's like, well, you just checked off the ate breakfast. So it's more when it comes to accuracy of charting, a lot of times it's about mindfulness.
Yes.
And, we've actually seen a number of cases where people have, signed off glucometer readings and put a number in a box. When, under investigation, they've admitted they never actually did that glucometer reading.
Which would be considered fraudulent documentation.
That's right.
Yeah. And not in the best interest of the client at all. Yeah.
Exactly. Same thing we've seen it with vital signs. We've seen it with, routine checks. We've seen it with, there's a number of instances where we kind of have those, repetitive tasks that we do that you sort of think, I've done this person's vital signs, every 4 hours for the last 3 shifts in a row. They've not changed. And somebody will just put a number in the box. And, that is the extremely concerning end of that spectrum. And then as far as timeliness goes, we still do see a lot of people, as I call it, cluster charting and leaving all of their care having been done in the shift and doing one charting entry at an hour before the end of their shift and reciting everything they've done. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. A, who knows if you're actually accurately recalling everything you did in the day, for one thing. Plus, it's not timely to the events. And the other thing is, if something happens partway through the shift, this patient, or something happens to you partway through the shift,
right? Yeah.
Somebody's going to pick that up and keep going.
Yes.
And so there's all kinds of problems with the cluster charting.
Yeah.
And with the med admin side of charting, we do see a lot of people still signing the meds off before they're given. So, some of those things that we know sort of persistently happen, we're still seeing quite frequently.
What about pre-pouring with meds? Do you see much of that?
Yeah, leading into the medication management.
Yeah,
you mentioned that.
Yeah, and the other challenge we're seeing, sometimes we're not only seeing pre-pouring meds, but we're seeing pre-pouring of meds by the individual who has the designation to administer the meds, but pre-pouring the meds, going on one of those extended breaks.
Oh, wow.
And leaving the administration of the meds to another healthcare team member, which... this is where you get those complex ones, right? There's an assignment of responsibility that was inappropriate. There's pre-pouring of meds that's inappropriate. You never give a med that you didn't draw up or obtain yourself to begin with.
Yeah,
it's probably pre-signed by the person who took the break before it was. Just so many problems in those scenarios. But yeah, those are really the issues we're seeing in documentation. We're seeing, and again, it's more about like mindfulness is a problem. Like, I think people are just almost, when you do a task multiple times, just like, oh yeah, I got to go in and do that. Got to go in and do that. And they're not really thinking about what they're charting, for one thing. And then there's the complacency piece. Right? Where it's like, oh, well, this person's been stable for 3 days. I'm just going to I'm just going to cut and paste what somebody else put on the last shift and put it into my note. And, that's not appropriate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned, we could probably spend a full hour on, on drug diversion, what we're seeing happening right now. It's across Canada. The substance use disorder is increasing across Canada. So, here in Newfoundland as well. And, we're seeing nurses affected by that.
Sure.
And, I guess want to say the expectation of the regulator related to fitness to practice, right? It's the registrant's responsibility to reflect on and ensure that they're fit to practice.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be acceptable, of course, to divert narcotics wouldn't be acceptable, but also to arrive at the workplace under any sort of cognitive impairment as well. So, that could be a prescribed medication.
That's right.
Right. And if that impairs you and you're unable to provide that safe care, then, you may have to recognize that, or you do have to recognize that and remove yourself from the workplace. So I just want to kind of touch on that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we occasionally see is people who have fitness to practice concerns that aren't necessarily relating to things that they have, any element of control over. So failing eyesight or failing mobility,
physical things,
declining cognitive abilities because of age or other sort of organic reasons. Like we do have individuals that have, come to us through a disciplinary complaint where we know that is one of the underlying factors. Mm-hmm. So we do have mechanisms to address those things, but absolutely that is the key to it, is regardless of what it is that's impacting your ability to practice safely, competently, and ethically, you have to be able to reflect on that before you walk in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, Brenda, I want to thank you for having this conversation with us today about, some of the trends that we are seeing, that you are seeing in the professional conduct review department at the college. I think it was a good opportunity to share some of those insights, because you're right. It's a good reminder for people out there who are listening, if you have picked up some poor practices throughout your career, just as a reminder that, you do have your code of professional conduct and the standards of practice that you must adhere to. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're unable to meet those expectations in the professional standards, the college does have a tool. It's called a toolkit for resolving professional practice issues. And that is available on our website under practice resources. And, it helps registrants address a professional practice concern. It could be related to client safety, but it could be related to you being unable to meet your standards. And it helps you address those matters in a professional way. So we do have that toolkit. I just wanted to highlight that. So thanks again, Brenda.
Thank you
for being here today. And I just want to remind everybody that all episodes of the College Connection podcast can be used towards your CCP. And I encourage everybody to subscribe to our channel and to like and leave a comment wherever you can. Thanks.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the NL College of Nurses.
I'm Dave, and saving with TD Insurance made me feel like I scored my own jingle.
With over 30 ways to save, nobody saves like Dave.
Save on home and auto like only you can at tdinsurance.com/ways to save.
TD. Ready for you.